Hey everyone, I'm your host Adrian. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Thanks so much for hopping in, and welcome to today's Rupa Live class presented by the all-new Rupa University, the best way to learn about specialty lab work from industry experts like Dr. Chapman. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I will be your host for this afternoon. Today, we have a very, very special guest in Dr. Michael Chapman with Genova Diagnostics, here to walk us through how to use metabolomics testing to identify and correct mitochondrial dysfunction. Before jumping in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Everyone joining will be muted by default, but don't fret. If you do have any questions, please use that Q&A button in your menu bar, and we'll host a live Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Immediately following the Q&A, yours truly will show you exactly how to order this test right on Rupa Health. And if you have to jump early, no worries, y'all. We are recording this session, and you'll be able to find all of it on rupauniversity.com within the coming days once we've had the opportunity to do some edits to it. Additionally, if you are a fan of this type of content, be sure to check out rupauniversity.com to get access to all the previous sessions that we've done. So with that, let's jump in. I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Chapman. Dr. Chapman has a doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University in Seattle, Washington, and is currently the Director of Product Innovation at Genova Diagnostics. Aside from educating and consulting with integrative and functional medicine practitioners, he's responsible for researching and developing new test profiles. He has delivered presentations nationwide at functional and integrative medicine conferences and is a writer and contributor to the latest edition of the Textbook of Natural Medicine. Also, he's the co-host of Genova Diagnostics podcast titled The Lab Report. So check it out. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Chapman. I'll go ahead and let you take it from here.
Nice. Thank you so much, Adrian, for that very nice introduction. And let me get sure my screen is going. There we go. And hopefully that looks all right there. I'm really thrilled to be able to present on this topic. It's something that I think is growing in interest more and more every single week that we're discussing overall chronic disease management, and root cause, getting to the root cause of chronic disease, which is really, I think, what most of us are here to do, here to learn about, and trying to utilize more in our practices to help people get better. And so this topic of mitochondrial dysfunction is gaining steam. It has been pretty well established in the research for quite some time. And I'm going to talk about how we can really understand this from a lab testing perspective, how we can get hints and insights, and even talk a little bit about what you might expect from different patient populations that you could be seeing in your practice. So with that, let's just get rolling. So we've got objectives here. We always start with objectives. That's kind of standard for these webinars. But what are metabolomics, right? It's kind of a big word that's getting thrown around quite a bit. What's a metabolomic assessment? Then we're going to talk a little bit about how that applies to the NutrEval and the Metabolomics Plus tests, and a little bit about what the differences are between those tests. And then we'll specify around mitochondrial dysfunction. What is it? What are the consequences? Why do we even care? And then talk about how you can identify mitochondrial dysfunction on a Metabolomics Plus test, and also some of the things that you would be thinking about to help correct it. So when I think about this term, metabolomics, one of the things about it is, yes, it is becoming more and more prevalent in our industry, but it's not really a new concept. Metabolomics is essentially another word for a group of metabolites, or looking at metabolites. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means later. But the way I kind of think about bucketing these two things is, on the one hand, you have genomics, right? And this is the study of genes, which can tell you a little bit about predispositions to conditions. This is where we're talking about things like genetic polymorphisms, or SNPs, as you probably are aware of them and calling them. And then sitting on top of genomics, there's epigenomics. And I use that language because actually epigenetics refers to above the genes. So it's talking about how your genetic potential from your genes is manifested. And there's several different categories here. There's transcriptomics, which looks at all the RNA components within a cell. There's proteomics, which looks and models all the proteins. And then there's this metabolomics, which is really looking at kind of the byproducts, the metabolites, all the little intermediaries between those biochemical processes that you might have learned about at school. And of course, another thing that affects our genes is our environment, right? Our exposome, as we call it. And this is things like the air you breathe and the toxins and everything that's around you that can also have an impact. So I kind of start high level and think, okay, there's genomics and then there's epigenetics, and metabolomics is a part of that epigenetic framework. So in distinguishing the clinical value of these, genomics is this very large field, and we tend to think of using genomics clinically as it relates to alterations, right? Mutations or SNPs. But genomics is quite a bit larger than that. It also has to do with the overall structure of the genes, how they've evolved, how they're mapped, how they're edited, how they're sequestered, how they're repaired. So even within genomics, the way that we're currently using them is still quite narrow. But you do see a lot of times that providers are looking at genomics to learn more information about potential risks for chronic disease manifestation. And I have a question mark there because I'll talk a little bit about whether how much we can really glean from this type of an analysis. But we also see that sometimes we'll use the genomic information or the SNPs to provide insight into a potential need for a nutrient, right? Classically, we think of MTHFR providing information about whether a patient might need folate, and specifically methylated folate. And again, a little bit of a question mark. And a question mark because I think that there's probably a lot of work left to do in this arena. For example, less than 1% of our genetic SNPs have been evaluated in the research, right? So there's more than 335 million known SNPs. And for each and every single one of us, we typically have around 4 to 5 million sites. So there's a lot to uncover. Genes often have different patterns across populations. So the relevance of a COMT SNP in somebody who has a particular ethnic background might be entirely different. And we see that all over the place in the research. So you have to understand what it means for that patient with their overall picture. It's personalized, right? Another thing is that genetic SNPs at one location can be associated with another SNP at a separate location. We tend to see compensation where there's maybe a breakdown here, there's a compensation over at this other SNP. So that's where we have to start looking at how all the SNPs fit together. And that's the field of haplotyping, which is a whole other conversation and a whole other webinar, but it's super interesting. So the bottom line of all of that and what I'm trying to say is that with genomics, we're still at the tip of the iceberg, and there's hundreds of SNPs on each gene, multiple coding regions. There's all these things that can really muddy the waters, I would say. So genes, at the end of the day, they might give us information about predisposition, but the environment is so much more important, right? The epigenetic aspect. So that's how we get from genomics to what's different is something like the metabolomics and a metabolomics assessment. So again, what is metabolomics? What are metabolomics? It's the study of biochemical processes. And these biochemical processes, right? You're going from point A to maybe point F, and there's different steps all along the way. And this cell is so complex and all the things that it's doing. Here's one example on the screen with the Krebs cycle, as you might remember it, and energy production. And you can see all those little details, all those little green and yellow and red circles are things that we're measuring. They're metabolites. And a metabolite is, honestly, at the end of the day, I think of it simply as it's just anything the cells make, right? And again, we can look at this and get a sense of the biochemical fingerprint of the patient. And each one of them may have clinical value, and each one of them might give us information about nutrient need based on backups in these pathways. They're kind of like highways, right? And so if you're seeing all these cars going all these different highways, and then one highway is particularly backed up, then you might think, oh, there's maybe an accident there. And that in this case, the accident might be a need for a nutrient. And that's what's slowing that highway down. So genomics, it can tell you about potential, but metabolomics is telling you about what's happening right now. It's telling you about the expression. So taking a quick look at this test overall, the Metabolomics Plus, if you're familiar with our NutriVal test, they're very similar In fact, the organic acids and the amino acids are exactly the same. The NutriVal does include a blood draw for fatty acids as compared to the Metabolomics Plus, which has a blood spot, a finger stick test for an add-on part of the fatty acids. So that's kind of the key difference in my mind between the two tests. So we'll talk a little bit about some of these minor details of the report, such as the first page here is a results overview page to kind of roll up all the information into the key areas that you can focus on. So we have this colorimetric graphic followed by these functional imbalance scores or pillars. And the 5 key categories here with respect to what you can glean from a metabolomics test, I think are broken down into oxidative stress, which can be a dysfunction, mitochondrial dysfunction, omega imbalance, which relates to inflammatory tendencies, toxic exposure, and then methylation imbalance, which tells us how well detoxification is somewhat working, and of course, all the other things that methylation does in the body. Another separate webinar. So when we look a little bit closer at these functional imbalance scores, I think here's a great time to ask the question and talk a little bit about what is mitochondrial dysfunction. Okay, so if we start with what is the mitochondria, this is a organelle within cells, right? And so it's a subsection within each one of your cells, and it's responsible for creating energy. It creates energy in the form of ATP. That's its main role, is to do this. And so when you start to have a breakdown in how the mitochondria function, then you start to have poor cellular energy production. And as you can imagine, if you start to lose energy, if the grid starts to go down in your cell per se, then that cell is going to have a hard time thriving and doing its particular job. And so over time, as the mitochondria become weaker and weaker, we see this associated with almost every one of the chronic diseases that's coming in on a regular basis into our practices. So cardiovascular disease associated with mitochondrial dysfunction, diabetes and insulin resistance, mood disorder even is strongly correlated with mitochondrial changes and mitochondrial dysfunction. Chronic fatigue, obviously, because if you're not making energy in the cells, you're going to have a hard time having energy systemically, right? Cognitive decline makes sense. And then that's just, a high level list. There's so many more things that you could put here. And if you even kind of take a step back and you think about mitochondrial dysfunction from a bigger lens, we're talking about not just chronic disease, but the aging process as well. Because the mitochondria, if they start to die off, then your cells start to die off, and we have the increased need for cell replication and all these additional components. So when we talk about mitochondrial dysfunction, I think it's just as important to include it in our concept of aging as well. Currently, I think definitions around the aging process involves inflammation and oxidative stress, both of which trigger mitochondrial dysfunction. So they're all intertwined in there. And one other fascinating thing, it's critically important in immune responses, because the cells that are in your immune system and are being charged with attacking and fighting things off and creating balance, they all require energy as well. And so there's tons of information and research around mitochondrial dysfunction in the immune system. So similar but different, oxidative stress is a whole different concept, right? It's the free radical damage that occurs within cells. And free radicals can come from different places. They can come internally, endogenously, through the cell's own biochemistry is going to make free radicals on its own. But we also think about free radicals coming from the outside, right? Exposure to toxins and things like this. And so on the test, we can look for oxidative stress and oxidative damage around DNA and fats and other items. And so again, oxidative stress is associated with chronic diseases such as cardiovascular disease risk, metabolic dysfunction, cancer risk, on and on and on. And again, another key feature of the aging process, here's a paper that I pulled that talks about oxidative stress results from imbalance. And I think that's an interesting word that they use, not necessarily excess, but imbalance between reactive oxygen and nitrogen species. So this is what led them to create their theory of aging, which is oxidative stress, inflammation, and I would insert mitochondrial dysfunction in there if it were me to. So then the other things that are on that front page that we're looking at is omega imbalance. And omega imbalance is a really good way to look at one potential cause of inflammation. So, I think that's super important when we're talking about how to help the patient recover. Toxic exposure certainly leads to oxidative stress itself from heavy metals, plastic, petrochemicals, things like that. And then methylation imbalance can tell us about cofactors. We also have a methylation panel. If you start to suspect methylation imbalances or you have a high score here. So that's the roll-up. That tells you kind of like where to focus, because you're going to focus on where the patient's results come back looking most dysfunctional, most abnormal, right? And then the very next page on the report gives you a nutrient need overview. Essentially, okay, here's some of the problems. Here's some of the things that you can do to correct it. And these nutrient need recommendations are based on their age and gender specific, and they're based on the individual test results. And I'll kind of demonstrate how we end up getting there at the end of the day. But you first get an assessment for each one of these nutrients on a 0 to 10 score. We show the daily recommended intake, which is more of the sort of governmental guidelines, and then suggested recommendations based on the results of the test. And they correspond to the nutrient need score as well. We also have a separate section as the providers themselves probably have alterations. You, of course, know the patients better than we do as a lab company. And so ultimately trying to provide a little bit of insight, but you are the ones on the boots on the ground providing the overall recommendations at the end of the day. So a big portion of a metabolomics test is organic acids. And, there's all sorts of different discussions around organic acids and their clinical utility. I would say that one thing that separates Genova is that for a long time, we have taken to heart exactly what should, could, and would be said, what is a bit of a stretch and what is a leap around clinical interpretation of these things. And that was one of the big efforts that we took when writing the organic acid chapter for the textbook of natural medicine, to make sure that we are not overstating what we know and how much of this is based in literature. So organic acids are organic compounds. They're parts of cellular processes, right? They're parts of metabolomics, they're metabolites, and they can give us different clinical windows. So a lot of the section on this, or a lot of the B vitamin recommendations for the test come from the organic acids, because these processes in the body rely heavily on cofactors like B vitamins and minerals. So we'll talk a little bit about the ins and outs, but there's a lot on here about energy production in the mitochondrial function as well. So if you look at the bottom left, there's an entire section on cellular energy and mitochondrial markers, and we'll dig into that a little bit more. So we kind of group these organic acids as far as their clinical relevance also. So on that note, with the mitochondria and organic acids, this is a display of that section I was highlighting, the cellular energy section. And here you can see right in front of you why we're looking at this. So let me give you an example of how this works. So in the cell, there's one process of producing energy, or a step in the process, called beta oxidation. This is where we take fats from our diet and turn it into acetyl-CoA that can then be used for energy. That's the process of beta oxidation. And what you see here is that process requires magnesium and vitamin B2, right? And so if you start to have an insufficiency or a deficiency in those, then what can happen is these go down a separate pathway and not into beta oxidation. And what we're measuring, adipic acid and subearic acid, those are essentially byproducts. So it's kind of like that highway. It's almost like a detour, right? So if we start to see lots of metabolites on a detour rather than on the main highway, it's telling us information that there could be a need for magnesium and vitamin B2 within the cell, right? So cellular insufficiencies can result in elevated levels of various organic acids. And that is how we're taking this entire page and churning it into the data that we're providing. So really, it's not a direct assessment of micronutrients, but instead it is a look at multiple analytes, multiple pathways that all require the same nutrient cofactor, and we roll that up. So it's very extensive. So here's what it looks like. We've got these different sections, as I mentioned, and on the right-hand side, we have some oxalate markers as well. We'll talk about that. And then there's some of our oxidative stress markers like lipid peroxides and 8-OHDG. So the main categories of these organic acids are malabsorption and dysbiosis markers. So some tell us a little bit about gut function. Cellular energy and mitochondrial markers, which is going to be a big part of what we focus on when we're thinking about mitochondrial dysfunction. Vitamin markers, certainly, and there's some things within there that can point to some changes in energy demand. Neurotransmitter metabolites, toxin and detoxification markers, and lastly, oxalate markers are all part of the organic acid section. And again, if you want to learn more about that, there's a lot of different resource materials we have on our website. Each one of these analytes is, we've done a deep dive, thoroughly evaluated what the significance is of those analytes. And so that's a great tool to look at. The other component that's standard with the Metabolomics Plus is an amino acids first morning void sample. And when we're looking at amino acids, you know, I think that we need to understand that everyone's going to have a little bit of interpersonal variability. And the clinical utility that I tend to find is, are they trending down the middle, right? I don't want to see everything shifted to the left or shifted to the right, because that's going to tell me there might be some issue around dietary protein intake, or maybe even digestion and absorption of protein, or how are these processes being utilized? So that is one thing to just really keep in mind. We're looking kind of for that general trend. And then the non-essential amino acids are similar. I want to look for a general trend down the middle, but they can also tell us about potential code factor movement, because at the end of the day, our essentials can be turned into non-essential amino acids with the right nutrition. So one question that comes up is, can we discern whether amino acid status is coming from how much the patient is eating versus how much is being utilized? And I would say, to a certain extent, because we have markers here that come from at least meat sources. So 1-methylhistidine is derived from things like chicken, turkey, fish, whereas 3-methylhistidine is derived from red muscle fibers. So I think this is a really interesting dichotomy, because by red muscle fibers, I really mean red meat or our own skeletal muscle tissue. So if I have a patient that comes in and they tell me that they are a vegetarian or vegan, and I see a high level of 3-methylhistidine, I mean, unless they're lying to me about their veganism, that's not coming from red meat. So I know that that is coming from breakdown of their own muscle tissue. They're going catabolic, right? And that is a really great bit of clinical information to be able to prevent sarcopenia. So the next section here is the essential and metabolic fatty acids, basically a window into what types of fats the patient has been consuming. And on the Metabolomics Plus test, this is a finger stick. It's a blood spot to look at these. So, you know, fatty acids, we know them so well as helping to look at the balance between things like omega-3s and omega-6s, which kind of tends to tell us about a likelihood towards inflammation or not. And that's really the power of those things like the omega-3s. So I also look at overall arachidonic acid levels, because we know that in excess can lead to pro-inflammatory items. So that's just another great analyte. There's other things on here like trans fat intake. And so that's going to help you look a little bit at, you know, how much of this is really in balance. So one final add-on to this test is the nutrient and toxic elements. And again, this is also available as an add-on. And this, look at all those different toxins on the left-hand side: lead, mercury, aluminum. Tells you about any sort of recent exposures. And that's important to keep in mind, because in the urine, we're really looking at recent exposure, like last 2 to 3 days. So that's important. And then on the right-hand side, we have some nutrients that can tell you a little bit about wasting, can also, you know, generally reflect what they're eating in the diet or supplementing with. So just another potential add-on. So that's a little bit of the report. And I want to now spend some time talking about how it relates to metabolic function, mitochondrial dysfunction. And I'm going to use a couple of different case studies, a couple of dietary strategies to get to the bottom of this. So obviously, unless you're living under a rock, you've heard about the keto craze and the ketogenic diet. It's one of the most popular dietary interventions currently. And it does have a pretty long history as being studied in seizure disorder with a lot of success. And obviously people are using it more and more to help with dysglycemia, insulin resistance, and weight loss, certainly, and just the downstream effects of poor metabolic health. So the ketogenic diet is interesting there's various numbers that people throw out, but in general, we're talking about less than 20 to 50 carbs per day, and that's net carbs. So carbohydrates minus fiber and sugar alcohols. And that's generally what we think of. I think most people are thinking less than 20 grams is really where you're shooting for a ketogenic diet. And again, so the advantages are it's low glycemic. And the significance of that is that in insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction, mitochondria struggle. And with respect to energy production, you're actually not getting very good energy production in response to insulin resistance. It's highly inflammatory, and it creates a lot of oxidative stress on the system. When that oxidative stress damages the mitochondria, and what it actually does is, just to make it super simple, it tends to make the membranes of the mitochondria damaged so that they're a bit leaky. And leaky mitochondria don't produce as much energy as fully stable mitochondria. And so in the circumstances of something like insulin resistance, this has a tremendous impact all over the body. And we think of endothelial dysfunction, specifically around cardiovascular disease. That's one of the big links between insulin resistance and mitochondrial dysfunction. It's that aspect of endothelial dysfunction. So a lot of words there, but at the end of the day, what we're going for is low glycemic and the production of ketones. And not only is ketones just a symptom of being on the ketogenic diet, but there's evidence that it actually improves the antioxidant status by reducing free radicals. It's almost like it's kind of like a stimulus for production of our endogenous antioxidants like glutathione. So the production of ketones is important there. There's also some evidence that might support that the ketogenic diet can improve new mitochondrial creation. So that certainly would be helpful in somebody who has mitochondrial dysfunction. And at the end of the day, we're talking about an energy redistribution. And that's what we're going to be able to pick up on with something like the Metabolomics Plus. Some considerations around, negatives, contraindications, or things to consider with a ketogenic diet is, the balance of fats that they're consuming, and the fiber intake, whether that's going to be adequate to stabilize the microbiome, and also are they able to detoxify the protein. I mean, not surprisingly, I think when a lot of people just jump into the ketogenic diet, they focus mostly on protein and forget that it's really meant to be more of a high fat, moderate protein diet. So when I look at the cellular energy section here, I'll start right here because we have beta hydroxybutyric acid, which is actually a ketone bond, right? And so the production of this is certainly going to be confirming to me that somebody is actually on the ketogenic diet and they're producing an adequate amount of ketones. So in the absence of that, this marker actually has a different story, which is the opposite story. In the absence of a ketogenic diet or maybe strenuous exercise, it actually can tell me about worsening glycemic control and insulin resistance. So you always got to know if that marker's high. Are we talking about someone who's intentionally doing ketones, or are they making ketones because their insulin resistance is getting worse? So super important biomarker there. But another one that's interesting is not beta hydroxybutyric acid, but alpha hydroxybutyric acid. And a little bit of unknown about this, but in the research, alpha hydroxybutyric acid has actually been correlated with overall poor lifestyle habits, meaning things like smoking, drinking, insulin resistance, alcohol, sedentary lifestyle. So that is an interesting marker from that perspective. Now, whether it actually demonstrates as being high in the production of ketones and in a ketogenic diet, a little bit of a question mark, although we've started to see it because it's just such a similar biomarker. So more information to come on that portion of it. Another thing that I think about with mitochondrial function in the ketogenic diet is, again, an energy shift. We're moving from how we're creating energy away from glucose and into beta oxidation and even protein oxidation or protein breakdown. So one way that we can get energy is actually from the branched chain amino acids, right? Valerate, isovalerate. And so those branched chain amino acids can be broken down and used for energy. And part of that step is these alpha ketos here at the top of the page that you can see, alpha keto adipic. Most of those alpha ketos are relating to branched chain amino acid breakdown. So if these are on the higher side, then I might be suspecting that, again, we have that energy shift going away from glucose burning and into using other sources for fuels. So if I see this in excess, there's two things that I think about to help. Branched chain amino acids themselves, right? Making sure adequate protein is refilling the system. And then B1, B2, B3, and alpha lipoic acid are also incredibly important, because what they are doing is they're lubricating that entire system. They're the cofactors needed to turn our branched chain amino acids into energy ultimately at the end of the day. So I think looking at alpha keto acids for insight around that shift in energy production in a response to a ketogenic diet is also going to be quite helpful. There, I circled it. Amino acids are always going to be something that you want to look at and study hard, but especially in the ketogenic diet, I think it might be fairly common to see overall high levels of amino acids. Is that bad? Not necessarily. I think the only thing we need to make sure of is that these amino acids are being detoxified appropriately. And we don't want to overwhelm the protein detoxification system, which is the urea cycle. So I always look at these urea cycle markers for some insight into, just to make sure that it's an adequate amount of protein and we don't need to break it or bump it down a little bit. And certainly you can get more insight, like we talked about, excuse me, with the dietary peptide related markers, as they give me some window into overall meat consumption. With fatty acids in the ketogenic diet, I think about this balance between inflammatory fats and anti-inflammatory fats. And there's still certainly a lot of information and a lot of discussion happening right now on saturated fats, non-saturated fats, polyunsaturated fats, all these different categories, and trying to move away from this system of vilification and into a little bit more understanding about what roles these individual fats play in our diet. But again, I think it's a great idea to make sure that there is a balance between some of these different types of fats, like arachidonic acid as compared to EPA, which is an omega-3 fat, right? Because that's going to help the system be able to create adequate inflammation when necessary, but not excessive. And you can alter that by adjusting animal protein sources or just overall, the types of fats that are coming in. So on the opposite end of the spectrum, I think about vegetarian vegan diets, and some of the advantages that we might think about here is a great fiber intake, a great source of micronutrients, a great source of antioxidants. And with all those things, then I'm looking at, the microbiome. And so I'd be looking at the gut metabolites and, looking at overall adequate nutrition as well. We think about, like low B12 status in particular, or making sure that they are in fact getting adequate amino acids. So just a quick look here with respect to somebody who's, like I think of vegetarian vegan diets and I think of like the morning smoothie. And one thing about the morning smoothie is that it's going to be really, really rich in dietary phenols and flavonoids for the most part, depending on what's in the smoothie. But if we think of berries and cherries and things like that, then those are really high in dietary phenols. And dietary phenols are actually broken down into a lot of these products that we're measuring. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these results, that sometimes an overall shift of all of them toward the high side could be a response to what somebody's eating. If they have a lot of flavonoids and phenols in their diet, and again, that's not considered to be a harmful thing. In the absence of that, and you see a whole trend of these, then certainly I could be thinking about a problem around dysbiosis or overgrowth. We have a yeast fungal section here with D-arabinitol, which is a fairly specific marker for Candida. Candida makes D-arabinitol, so if that marker is high, always think about following up with a GI test, like a GI effects. In vegetarian vegan, B12 is going to be something I'm constantly staring at, and this is just telling you really what goes into our B12 status, because sometimes people will say, oh, well, they got, a direct measurement of B12 in whatever blood part, and it was fine. Well, okay, just because there's enough in the serum, does that mean that the cell is using it well? That's why we're looking at these other analytes like methylmalonic acid, succinic, other methylation markers, even some amino acid metabolites. So there's a ton, probably 16 to 20 different biomarkers that go into just the B12 alone. And that kind of gives you a window into how much of a true metabolomic and cellular assessment this is. Amino acids, unfortunately, it is very, very common for us to see a trend of low amino acids in somebody who is vegetarian and vegan. And I think that's oftentimes just, I don't know, it's hard to say. I think sometimes even any of us underestimate our overall protein needs or don't even know how much protein we are getting on a regular daily basis. So that's very, very common to see low trends like the one on this page here. And then also the dietary peptide related markers, like I mentioned, they would be not surprisingly low as they come from meat sources. Another lifestyle thing that can talk a little bit and demonstrate a little bit about oxidative stress is exercise. And this is another, I think, really great way to utilize the Metabolomics Plus test, is because so often we'll be running these on chronic disease patients, certainly, but also on people who are very fit and are wanting to optimize their performance. And there's so much insight to be gleaned with respect to that, because at the end of the day, exercise really creates an increased demand for micronutrients. Because for one, exercise itself is an oxidant. It creates oxidative stress. So we need to make sure that we're mitigating that oxidative stress with the appropriate antioxidants. And that's a huge thing that can help people boost and optimize their exercise. Amino acids, because they are turning over protein so quickly. Amino acids are super important, making sure that those are adequate. And then B vitamins, because if you think about it, with all that energy creation that's needed to exercise vigorously, you are running those energy production pathways very, very hard. And as we showed at the beginning, the mitochondria rely heavily on B vitamins to do that whole Krebs cycle production of energy. And also CoQ10 is very, very important from the perspective of protecting the mitochondria, but then also creating energy. So that is really important to keep in mind and compare to what their results for their oxidative stress is, right? So you want to watch their redox balance. That's going to be how you really support people. So, excuse me, that's really kind of the test and how I tend to think of how things shift in the context of various diets, lifestyles, and mitochondrial dysfunction. So high level, the metabolomics is basically a fingerprint of the metabolism, and it tells us all this incredible information about stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, inflammation, and you can do it at home. It's a urine test and a dried blood spot, so super easy as well. And I know that there is a lot to go over there. And I just want to say that we have a ton of support materials on our website. We have a NutriVal Metabolomics Support Guide, which is like hundreds of pages and thousands of literature citations. It's really a great source for any of your questions. We have regular webinars ourselves on our website. We do medical education consults through our website as well. If you have a patient result that you need some help with, feel free to give us a call. And as Adrian mentioned, also the lab report, which is kind of a silly little podcast, but we do talk a lot about these concepts. We talk about mitochondrial dysfunction, we talk about endothelial dysfunction, and we talk about how to use these tests. So we try to geek out a little bit, but also have some fun. It's a little bit on the silly side, which is intentional. And so I hope you guys check it out and enjoy it. So with that, I will say, yeah, I think we're good for some questions.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Knopman.
Yeah, for sure.
There's no shame in the nerding out and being silly. I love it.
I mean, the information can be so thick sometimes that you really gotta break it up and try to have some fun with it. So hopefully we find that right balance. Especially
for those folks like me who are so interested in these kinds of topics, but I'm not a practitioner myself. Making it a little more human, I always appreciate that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
With that, let's jump in. We got some really amazing questions, and y'all, if you just to reiterate, we are recording this session, so we had a ton of people join a little bit late. We are recording this session, so it will be available in the next few days on rupauniversity.com to watch that recording, as well as we'll send that out to you. And if you have to jump early, no worries at all. Again, we're recording the whole thing as well as the Q&A. So with that, let's just go ahead and jump in. And again, also, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. We can keep going. We've got about 17 minutes here. So first question we got is, what is the best resource for understanding of organic acids?
Yeah, so there's been so many different people who have written on organic acids along the years. So honestly, we tried to do, when we created that support guide, the NutrIval Metabolomics Plus support guide, we tried to take everything. It was a kitchen sink approach, basically. I mean, we combed every piece of literature related to every single analyte as possible. So I think that probably, between that and the textbook of natural medicine around the organic acid chapter, are probably the two sources that I would rely on for clinical interpretation. And in those, it talks not only about the clinical relevance, does this marker show up high in people with schizophrenia? Does that marker show up low in people with adrenal, issues or things like that? All those clinical tidbits are in there, but then also, how does it relate to nutrition and the nutritional cofactors that surround it? So it's fantastic, especially for, if you just want to look and take a couple analytes, each day to learn a little bit more about them. It's a good material.
That's awesome. So let's say you're working with a patient here, trying to initial tests. How often or how soon can you retest a patient?
It's a good question. It's a little bit of a clinical judgment. I typically will think about every 6 months, especially if we're kind of just doing a little bit of maintenance. I might even stretch that out a little bit. But one of the things that's important is that if somebody's got a lot going on and you're throwing a lot of things at them, then it can be helpful sometimes too to assure yourself that you're actually doing something good, right? That the stuff you're doing is working. So in those circumstances, I think 3 months could be a good window as well. With our GI testing, we certainly would say 2 to 3 months if we see any panic markers like calprotectin or pancreatic elastase being an issue, because I know we're not talking about GI, but those are things that are directly tied to pretty severe chronic diseases. So in some circumstances, you'd follow up even sooner.
Yeah, and we'll have you back to talk about GI, I'm sure, in the future.
Nice.
This is an interesting question. I'm actually very curious as well, especially somebody within your position. What does the future of metabolomics look like, and what's really exciting for you?
It's going to be understanding how metabolism works in different patient populations. I think is going to be right first from a predictive standpoint. That's already going on right now, and that's pretty helpful to say, hey, this pattern is predictive of this chronic disease. But that's not really telling you the nuance. Like, as clinicians, what we want to know is, like, what can I do, right? And so I think being able to find where things shift appropriately in our interventions and what that kind of means. So that's one big exciting thing. But another thing is that there are correlations within these, huge fingerprints that we don't even understand yet. So for instance, we've done some internal data analysis to show that, a particular analyte was associated with GI inflammation that, like, we never would have thought of. And so we have to go in and say, okay, what is going on? Right. And it allows us down this pathway of ideas and thoughts and connections that we've never even discovered. And that's kind of the power of the data part of it, because, data shows correlations and it's not really biased. It doesn't have a slant. So it's our job to figure out what's actually going on. And I just have so much fun doing that part of it too.
Yeah, that's so exciting. Question more so on the patient side of things. What about people with celiac disease, and what would you look for in the test, if anything?
With celiac disease, so we're thinking about somewhat of an inflammatory condition, generally relegated to the GI tract. But with celiac, also we know, that cascade of autoimmune conditions can start to stack up. And so there are some things that I would look at from an inflammatory standpoint that might show up. I'm thinking for no particular reason right now, but there's a set of markers called kynurenic acid and quinolinic acid. And quinolinic acid is an inflammatory product. It's part of a cascade of pathways that ultimately produces inflammation if it's not working correctly. So that would be something I'd be looking at. I've seen that very commonly in people with celiac disease and other autoimmune conditions. So that's kind of one thing. And then obviously other sources of inflammation, toxic exposure, and that sort of thing would be on the list too.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it best to avoid morning smoothies with phenol-rich micronutrients?
No, I don't think that would be, something to be concerned about. It's more so just something to understand how it can influence the test, right? Because there's so many different things going on this test. Whatever the patient's doing in their regular day-to-day, it's reflecting that, it's showing that, right? In the same way, if somebody's taking a fish oil, we're going to see that show up in the omega-3 section. It's just a good thing to be aware of so that, when it's high, why it's high, and it's not showing you that it's dysbiosis, but it's not an indication to say, ooh, it's bad. Stop taking it.
So similarly then, is it best to avoid all phenol-rich foods prior to a urine test?
You can do that. I think that would be helpful to demonstrate, you would remove that sort of muddiness of the dysbiosis section. Yep. So maybe for that, couple days before, if you really want to look sincerely at the dysbiosis section as it relates to how many bugs are there and what are they doing. So, that could be something that you can do. Or, again, we never recommend somebody stop doing something that's medically necessary or helping them, or even if you expect it to continue for a long time, then you want to see what their regular is. You want to see what their daily is. So, as long as it's not contributing to any sort of issues, I don't think it's necessary. It's a little bit of a clinical judgment.
Sure. We had this question quite a bit. So this is a Genova question specifically. What does, I guess, how do the metabolomics tests compare to the NutriEval? What would be the differences? What would be the use cases for a practitioner to use them on a patient?
Right.
Expanding on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at the end of the day, they're very similar. The biggest difference is a couple things. One, there's a few analytes that we're not able to get on the Metabomics Plus that are on the NutriEval, namely glutathione and CoQ10. Those are fairly labile, and we were not just able to get them yet on a dry blood spot. And we take all of that very seriously when we're, running these. We're taking quality assurances, quality controls very seriously. And if it's not stable and we can't get it, we'll look for a different way to do it, a different machine, a different extraction method to do it. But we're not going to take any chances as far as kind of winging it, if you know what I mean. And so that's one thing to be aware of. And the other thing is that the fatty acid portion, the omega-3s, the omega-6s, the omega-9s, those are an add-on to the metabolomics, whereas on the NutriEval, they are standard. They're part of the test. So that's one of the reasons why the Metabolomics Plus is a little bit cheaper. If you add on all the additional stuff, then it's basically the same price as the NutriEval because it's basically an at-home NutriEval. And that was one of the other goals. We're trying to help out. Phlebotomy is an ongoing issue. It has its own supply chain problems, it seems like. So the at-home collection part of it is really, I think, one of the use cases for the Metabolomics Plus.
Yeah, that's huge. I appreciate the clarification there, and hopefully that helps answer a lot of the questions that we had in the chat from that. This one, you had mentioned methylhistidine. What was this clinical significance of that, if you recall?
Yeah, so methylhistidine again was, there's two different varieties. There's 1-methylhistidine and 3-methylhistidine. And I tend to look at these with respect to meat intake. They can tell me about dietary meat intake. And 1-methylhistidine tends to come more from chicken, turkey, and fish, whereas 3-methylhistidine tends to come from red muscle fiber or, like I said, catabolism of your own skeletal muscle tissue. So those are the things, and I look at those in comparison to the overall amino acids because I can say, all right, this person's amino acids are low and their protein looks like it's deficient. Well, over here, I'm seeing that they're eating a ton of meat. Like those markers are high. I know they're eating a ton of meat. So these amino acids are not likely to be low because they're not eating enough protein. They might not be digesting and absorbing that protein. So that's one of the triggers there that helps me understand what the issue is with low amino acids. Is it dietary or is it digestion?
Perfect. Does the test always come with commentary such as recommendations?
It always comes with the recommendations on the second side, to my knowledge. There's no additional commentary. What we have in the commentary section, because the report used to be like 30 pages long with all the commentary, but we swapped that out for just a link on the PDF to the support guide, because you know, at the end of the day, clinicians, if they want to print it, they don't want to print that many pages, and most of them are viewing it online, so it's so much easier from scrolling. You just hit the link and boom, you're right at the support materials.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Speaking of the support guide, is it available just on the website, and can they make copies downloadable?
Absolutely, it is on the website. All you have to do is go to either the NutriVal or the Metabolomics Plus pages themselves. Look on the right-hand side under support materials or educational materials. It is right there.
Wonderful. Quick question on the book that you contributed to. Is the textbook Natural Medicine coming out with a new edition, and how do we get access to it if they're not but an MD?
Right, it just came out. I'm trying to think. I think that was maybe near the beginning of last year. So that was the new edition. That was, I think, it's the 6th edition. And where you can get that, I'm sure Professor Google would be able to help you find all the locations.
Yep.
I believe it's also on Amazon as well. So it's very easily accessible. Yeah.
There you go, folks. Go out, get it, buy it, study it, learn it.
Yeah.
Last couple questions we have here. So what tests would you order for a patient with chronic fatigue?
This would be one of the first ones, right?
Yeah.
This is going to tell me so much information about whether nutrition is playing a role, how much of a role it's playing. I mean, it's always playing a role, right? But that would be huge. The thing about chronic fatigue, which makes it so tricky, is that it's so multifactorial that there can be so many contributors. And so hormones is another thing, even just starting with sort of your standard blood work around hormones, your thyroid assessment, things of that nature. And then I think the next thing I would go to would be some sort of evaluation for adrenal axis, HPA axis balance. How much cortisol are they producing? Is their cortisol totally flatlined? Where are they at there? All those things come together to really help or make worse the chronic fatigue issue.
Yeah. Any reason not to test people who have cancer and are on radiation or chemo?
That's a good question. I don't know all the medications, all the chemo drugs off the top of my head that might have interference or reactions with the test. In general, we do have that information on the website. Actually, if you go to our test prep section, we have basically every bit of interferent that you might be thinking of, anything that can potentially influence different markers on the test, a ton of information there to help answer those questions. From a clinical standpoint, it's tricky because you're shifting so many things with that treatment that how much of a reflection of the person is the test results as compared to how much of a reflection of the therapy. So I could make a case that it might make more sense to wait when the patient is currently not under chemo. But I do know that there are some doctors who have certainly done it, and they have even more insight into how you would apply it to that patient population.
Yeah. Got a couple more minutes left. How can mold affect one's microbiome or gut health, or can mold affect one's microbiome or gut health?
Sure. I mean, depending on how you define mold too, the first thing is, yeast is certainly a form of fungus as well. And that's one direct way. There's the candidas are the most classic examples of being able to affect your GI tract. But, even things like, imbalance in the commensal yeast, because the commensal yeast, there is not just a microbiome, there is a mycobiome, and that has clinical impacts as well, which we're only getting, to studying it right now. And there's going to be tons on the microbiome, I'm sure. But I think the question is probably more about mold exposure and biotoxin illness. And so, probably a little bit uncertain, but like a lot of the bacterial toxins, I would think that these mold toxins, they're going to be somewhat of an endotoxin. And so their capacity to create GI inflammation, their capacity to cross the mucus barrier, get in systemically, that's all going to cause problems. And so, classic with any chronic disease, I'm thinking inflammation, I'm thinking oxidative stress, I'm thinking GI dysfunction and GI inflammation. And then, long-term exposure, it can there's been evidence that it can muck up some of the enzymatic pathways in the body. So, where exactly to pinpoint, I would think of it more as like a dirty drug, because it's probably having effects on lots of different systems, and it's hard to necessarily know one by one what to look out for. But again, I would look for inflammation and oxidative stress as an overall root cause.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final question we have time for here, y'all, is what is the difference between the support guide and the interpretive guide?
Yeah, so the support guide is like the behemoth. That's got all the information in it. The interpretive guide is more so, that's meant to be like super quick. Let me check what this marker means. What do I do about it? I think it's just a couple pages all in all, some charts and things like that. So just quick navigation when you've got the patient in front of you, or maybe you're prepping for the patient, you're going through the report, you just need a quick reminder. That's the main difference. We don't want to force people to go through, searching through 100 pages if they're just have a very quick question.
Perfect. Spark notes versus the full novel.
Got it.
Absolutely. Awesome. And the final question here, y'all, is that we're getting is, how much does it cost? We're all super excited to use it. I'm going to show everyone exactly what the costs look like through Rupa Health here in just a moment. But I just want to thank you, Dr. Chapman, for joining us today. This has been an amazing presentation. We always love working with you and the team over at Genova Diagnostics. Do you have any final last thoughts or words you want to get out?
No, this is great. I mean, just thank you all so much for tuning in. Thanks to Rupa, thanks to you, Adrian, for inviting us and having us on. Happy to do this anytime. So yeah, just keep tuning, and there's a lot of great information coming out every single day. So we see it as part of our job to help everyone stay on top of it.
I love it. Amazing. Thank you again, Dr. Chapman. That was so much fun. We're definitely going to have y'all back. Like I said, we got to talk about GI next.
That's right.
So with that, everyone who you're able to stick around, we are at the hour. So if you have to hop off, no worries at all. What I'm going to do now is just do a quick transition over to Rupa Health. We're the hosts of these weekly webinars. And so I really want to show you exactly who we are, what we do, and specifically why we do what we do. So just for some context, Rupa Health is a platform designed to bring functional medicine to the world, right? We want to make functional medicine as accessible as possible. And right now there are a ton of different pain points that are associated with functional medicine. You think about the patient or practitioner side of things. Specifically on the practitioner side, most practitioners work with multiple different labs, whether you're working with Genova or, Access Medical, blood labs, doctor's data, you name it, right? Traditionally, what that means is that you have 5, 6, 7 different labs that you have to create portals for, that you have to log into to order all your different labs for. It can be a pain in the butt just for that, let alone just managing all of your different results. So what we've done is we've created our platform that's brought on over 25 different labs, soon to be 30 labs, including, of course, Genova, where you can just have one single login and have access to over 3,000 different tests in one place, including, of course, the metabolomics test. So that's how we make things easier on the practitioner side. Additionally, what we do is we manage the patient experience as well. So a lot of those additional pain points that we hear when it comes to these lab tests have to do with the patient experience. Number one, billing. These tests can be very expensive. So what are we doing as a clinic to help, lower the cost or barrier to get access to these expensive tests? Well, at Rupa, we offer multiple different payment solutions beyond cash. We offer, cash credit. We can accept HSA. We can accept FSA. We can even set up a financing plan with the patient. Beyond that, we'll send over FAQs, instructions, and videos walking the patient through how to complete their tests. We'll manage any specimen issues. We'll coordinate phlebotomy. That can take a lot of time out of your day, right? So we'll help coordinate the phlebotomy for your patients directly. And essentially what we want to do is make it as easy as possible. So you come to Rupa, you place your orders for your tests, we manage the whole patient experience, and then from there, you get your results directly imported into your Rupa Health account. The final thing that we're doing to help bring functional medicine to the world is education. You're all part of Rupa University right now. These live classes that we host with our partners, such as Genova, are really important. There's so much information out there in the functional medicine landscape. So being able to partner with these labs that are providing these super important tests are ways that we're allowing practitioners to learn, right, grow, and provide the best possible opportunities for your patients to get better. So with that, that's my spiel, but I want to just show you quickly how easy it is to order your tests on Rupa Health. And I'll show you that. To start an order on Rupa, we just need the patient's first name, last name, and email address. It's as simple as that. We collect everything else directly from the patient to complete the order. Once you're in your orders screen, it'll look similar to this. It breaks down into 3 different sections in this main body right here. We have our bundles that we can create. So you can create custom bundles. So sets of tests, sets of blood panels from any one of the labs that we work with. You can create these custom panels right here. One click, 10 tests added into your cart straight away. Below that, you have your favorites lists. So if I want to order a metabolomics test from Genova and I want to order a GI map or GI effects rather, I can do that straight away. But let's say maybe I want to order some blood tests as well from Access. I want to order a CBC. I can go ahead and click that. Again, you can order from 25 plus labs with just a couple clicks. Below that, you have access to the whole catalog, again, of over 3,000 tests at your fingertips. So if you are looking for a specific test, it's right here for you. Once those kits are added into your cart, you'll notice them appearing over here on the right-hand side. And if there's an add-on test available that you want to add on to that metabolomics, we make that as simple as this, right? That button will appear here, and then you can add on whatever add-on test that you're looking to straight away, right? We want to make sure that things are as user-friendly as possible. This screen will also break down all the details, things such as turnaround times, sample collection instructions. Again, we'll send those to your patients, but if you want a copy of them, they're available here. You can have access to a sample report, and any biomarkers that are going to appear on the test will be available and be listed here straight away, right? The idea, everything at your fingertips, simplified. Boom, boom, right? And if that's it, it's as simple as clicking send a patient. That's it, right? Being able to order from 25 plus labs within a matter of seconds, clicking send a patient, and that's it. One-stop shop. But let's talk about a little bit more detail here. We can do things like scheduling out orders. So if you want to retest a patient for metabolomics or GI in the future, you can go ahead and schedule that order out in advance. Generally, these would be things that would be required to be done manually, right? You hop in, you log into your different portals, and you set a little calendar reminder, and that's it, right? Through Rupa, we can automate that process for you. One less thing off of your plate. Pricing, how does it work? Well, we offer the same wholesale pricing that the labs offer. So we offer the same exact prices that Genova offers should you be ordering directly from them. Additionally, these are the same prices that your patients will be receiving. The way that we generate our revenue is simple. We charge a 7% processing and ordering fee on each order. So in this case, the patient would be paying $50. And let me clarify on that. That 7% is paid for by whoever's paying for the tests. So if you're having us bill the patient directly and manage billing on your behalf, then your patient will absorb this cost. Rupa is a free platform to sign up for. Unless you as a practitioner decide to pay for the tests yourself, you're never going to be billed anything from build anything by Rupa. Now, of course, you do have the option of paying for those tests yourself. If this is the way that you want to manage billing, that's completely fine. There's a number of use cases and reasons as to why you want to do that. That's not my business. But if you want to pay for the tests yourself, you would just bill the patient separately outside of our platform. But if you want to take that off your plate entirely, again, we can just bill your patient. We offer multiple different payment solutions, and I'll get into what the patient experience looks like here in a moment, but you just simply click that box. You can add notes for the patient. This can be anything that you want the patient to know outside of the standard instructions that we'll send their way, things such as supplement instructions, right? Notes to Rupa, this can be anything that, again, that you want us to know. You can just tell us, hey, great job, or you can let us know, hey, I prefer these results to be faxed my way, right? Write a note in there, that's fine. From there, you can add ICD-10 codes as well. Right now, Rupa doesn't accept commercial insurance, but what you can do is you can add ICD-10 codes. And what we will do is we'll go ahead and send your patient a template, walking them through how to create a super bill to submit to their insurance for potential reimbursement. Simple as that. Again, you don't have to be involved. But if nothing else, again, it's as simple as clicking send a patient. And that's how you order from 25 plus labs, over 3,000 different tests in one place with a couple clicks of the button. And go ahead and click send a patient. Once you send that order to your patient, you're able to track everything directly within your dashboard here. Now I'm going to click and do an existing order here, and you can see what it looks like. So as you can see in this example here, we have 4 different labs, 4 different tests that were sent to a patient, right? And you can do everything from this existing order to tracking when the sample arrived at the lab. If they're providing us with that information, we'll let you know when we can expect the results to come in to allow you to coordinate with your patient accordingly. Once those results are in, you're receiving an email notification. You can download the results straight away from your account, upload them into your EHR. We do work with Practice Better, Optimantra, and one more that's escaping me right now, I believe Elation, where you can just go ahead and have those results automatically imported into your EHR. If not, you click that button that says download, and it'll create a PDF for you. You can also send the results to your patient. So this is a secure HIPAA compliant link that we'll go ahead and send your patient. We will not send the results to your patient without your consent. So no worries there that we won't send the results to your patients. And additionally, you can even schedule a clinical consultation. So should you want some help interpreting these results with the lab, you can actually schedule some time here straight away with the lab that you're working with to help interpret those results. And the last thing here is you do have access to that instant requisition should it be available. You can just hop in here, view that requisition. Additionally, we have order events. So things such as shipping, you can see when the instructions were sent to your patient. There's a button here that will say resend to patient. So if your patient ever loses that email, you have the power to just resend it their way. But again, you're able to track all of your tests and your orders in one place. Powerful tool, right? Additionally, with just within the dashboard, you can search for patient, you can filter by status of your orders, all that good stuff. But again, the idea here is having a one-stop shop to manage all of your different lab tests. Last couple of things I'm going to show you real quick, right? What we're in right now is the support center. We of course have support, but I'm actually going to show you what the patient experience looks like. So once we send that order through to your patient, what does it look like? What's their experience? Because that's what I'll call the second pillar, right? We have the patient experience, we have the practitioner experience. What does the patient experience look like? As soon as you place that order, your patient will receive an email that looks similar to or an email from us notifying that the results came in, or rather that the tests were sent to them. We'll notify the patient once the kits have been shipped out. We'll send over those instructions and FAQs to your patient. We'll check in and follow up with your patient, and then your doctor, you, is notified as the results come in. So what does it all look like? This is an email that will be sent to your patient if they're the one paying. Okay. Hi, Joshua. Dr. Jordan has ordered these tests for you. We'll introduce who we are, and then we'll highlight the different payment options that we accept. So if you recall, we offer multiple different payment solutions to your patients. So not only can we do cash and credit, we can do HSA, we can do FSA, and we can even set up a 3-month interest-free payment plan. From there, we'll collect all the necessary information to complete the order, demographic information, shipping information, billing information, and then we'll highlight the tests that were ordered for your patients. If you decide to pay for the test yourself, nothing changes in the patient experience. The only difference here is just the communications that sends to your patient, right? We're not going to show them the cost of the test. We're not going to collect any billing information, but you will show them exactly what the test was that was ordered for them. From there, we'll notify the patient once the kits have been shipped. And then a few days after that, we will send over an email that looks very similar to this, basically outlining all the instructions and FAQs. A lot of the tests now have videos walking the patient through how to complete the tests. We'll walk the patient through how to fill the requisition forms. And if there is a blood draw required, we will help the patient coordinate that as well. So we can either customize those instructions for the blood draw based on your recommendation. So if you are lucky enough to be able to draw blood or have a preferred phlebotomist, we can take that information and send that to the patient. Otherwise, we will send over the options based on the lab that the patient is working with. So for example, each lab having their own network of phlebotomists or blood draw locations, we'll just send that to the patient. Otherwise, the patient can actually reach out to us. So whether it's support related and the patient has questions regarding their tests, or let's say the patient just wants additional options for blood draw, they'll reach out to our team and we can send over options based on the zip code that they're working with, or rather that they're living in. And really, again, just taking the whole patient experience off your shoulders, saving you time.